On these problems, we're going to evaluate, which simply means we're going to find the use order of operation, but we have absolute values, so we have to deal with them. So we have our variable, which is equals to a negative 7.5. So what I want to do that is replace that with the n. So I have my 8.4 minus absolute value 2 times a negative 7.5 plus 5. So what I want to be able to do, I need to work inside the absolute value signs first. So I'm going to do the multiplication, which that's going to be a negative 15 plus 5 inside the absolute value signs. And then I'm going to finish that off. That'll become a negative 10. And then now I have to understand what absolute value signs mean. And they mean anything inside of them become positive. So this negative 10 has actually become a positive 10. But it's still being subtracted from 8.4. And when we do that, we're going to get a negative 1.6. So we've evaluated by substituting in the variable. All right, let's look at our next example over here, 1b. I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I have 1 1/3 minus absolute value 2, and I'm going to substitute in a negative 2/3. That's what y equals, plus 1 and absolute value signs. So now from there, I can do inside the parentheses. If I do the multiplication, I'm going to get a negative 4/3 plus 1. And then I have 1 1/3 here. And negative 4/3 and 1 will actually be a negative 1/3. And once again, absolute value signs means anything inside of it becomes positive. So this becomes a positive 1/3, but the minus sign is still outside. So I'm subtracting 1/3 from 1 1/3, which will equal 1. Last example, same thing. We're going to go through the absolute value of 4x. Oops. I want to actually substitute the x, which happens to be a negative 2, 3, and then I have absolute value minus 3 1/2. So there's my substitution. So I now do inside the absolute value. So that becomes a negative 8 plus 3 with a minus 3/2 on the outside. This becomes a negative 5. Once again, the negative becomes positive because it's inside the absolute value. So 5 minus 3 1/2, which will end up with 1 1/2 as our answer. So what we're going to do is look at this word problem. And the key to this word problem is that we have a number that we're dealing with, the 100 square inch. But we have a plus or minus. Often that's called the range. So if you give or take, that's the range that the numbers go back and forth. And that happens to be 20. So we're going to use those two things to set up an absolute value problem. And right here, we have our absolute value problem where it's always going to have the absolute value signs, x, and then it's going to be minus whatever the constant is. And in this case, the constant happens to be 100. And then it's always going to equal the range. And the range in this case happens to be 20. So I have that written right over here as well. And then from there we solve. So here's the difficulty, or not the difficulty, but here's what you have to remember with absolute values. We get two answers, so we have to create two equations. The first equation is what we see without the absolute value signs. The second equation changes the 20, or whatever number happens to be over there, to a negative 20. This is also coordinated if you look at our problem. This right here and this right here is the plus minus that we have up here in our original problem. So we created that with absolute value. Now I can go through the process of solving the equation by adding 100 to both sides. So I get 120. And then if I add 100 to this problem, or this equation, I get x equals 80. So the range of tennis rackets or possible sizes is 80 all the way to a 120. And that is plus or minus 100, which is created by this absolute value equation.